Hey everyone, welcome to the very first episode of our brand new podcast, Love Meets Literature, hosted by me, Rachel.
And me, Joe.
Joe's currently Instagramless, but you can find me at Paperbacks and Sketchbooks on Instagram. And you can also follow our joint podcast account at Love Meets Literature. I'm very excited to be here. I think this is going to be a wild journey. I know you've never podcasted before. You've never been in front of a microphone. It's going to feel a bit odd.
Yeah, no, this is my first time doing anything like this.
I think it'll be fun. And we're going to have a blast and talk about books and talk about ourselves because people just love talking about themselves. Hopefully you want to hear about us. And we're just going to go with it. I guess we should explain this whole thing, how we know each other. We're actually engaged. We live together. We have a cat. Been together for 5 years. And now we're doing a podcast together. I'd say that's a huge relationship milestone.
That's like the next step in life, isn't it? It's like get married, get a house, start a podcast.
That's what it should be. I think it'd be really fun to just hear random couples' life stories on a random podcast.
How they met, how they got together, and then I guess what they're doing now.
I'd eat that up. If you do hear little meows in the background, that is our cat. She's very noisy. So I thought it would be fun if we each say some facts about the other person instead of us just talking about ourselves, even though that kind of contradicts my point of people love talking about themselves because I hate talking about myself.
Now we have to talk about each other.
I know, which I don't know if that's worse than talking about myself because what if I get a fact wrong? What if it's just not right?
Oh, that's true. What if you tell lies?
What if it's wrong? Oh, it stresses me out. I'm going to make you start.
I'm starting?
Tell everyone
Okay.
about me. Just random things.
You're Rachel.
Yes, I am. That is my name.
You're blonde.
Yep, that I am.
I know a lot of things about you, but at the same time, how do you explain somebody to somebody else?
What is a random, boring fact about me?
It probably depends on your definition of boring.
A lot of things can be boring.
You've watched Grey's Anatomy like 3 times through now, or 4 times through now, I think, and we're working on the 5th.
Kind of. I've never actually made it through the entire series of Grey's Anatomy before I stopped watching and then started over from the beginning because I'm weird like that. You know, if I stop a TV series and I don't watch it for a very long time, my brain tells me that I need to start over from the beginning. So that's why we're on Grey's again for like the 5th time because I can never finish it all the way through.
I guess that makes sense once you get to the parts that if you've forgotten it, if you've like taken a break or something, you need to go and back and kind of remember. Another boring fact. You went to college?
I did go to college.
I don't know if that's boring. Some people might think that's boring. It's hard to say.
I mean, school itself, not really that exciting, but there were parts of it that were fun. But yeah, overall, I'd say that's a boring fact. What did I major in college? Ooh, now this is like a quiz.
Oh, you majored in marketing.
I did major in marketing. Again, very boring major.
Extremely boring. This is the most fun, boring, interesting facts you could ever imagine. What about me? Do you have any boring facts for me or about me, I should say?
Well, I guess for starters, your name is Joe, but I call you Joey because that's how you introduced yourself to me.
That's true. I did go by Joey. And then now I feel like I have to go by Joe because I've like reached that, boring age point. It's like where every like Bill eventually becomes like a William or something like that or vice versa.
Let's see. You play a lot of video games?
I don't think that's boring. They're fun.
Well, yes, but I couldn't tell you which video games you play.
Oh, that's fair.
You hate reality TV, even though I make you watch it.
I do. I really do hate reality TV. It's so negative.
Well, you don't like cringeworthy things.
That's true. I get really bad secondhand embarrassment.
Even from sitcoms.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird.
Even from New Girl, it used to give me really bad secondhand embarrassment. That's also why I struggled to watch The Office.
But now you love New Girl.
That's true. I really do like New Girl.
So you see, I mean, cringe things can be fun.
They can be entertaining at times. Now, when we watch like those really bad ones on TLC, that can get a bit intense.
There's some good ones on TLC. 90 Day Fiancé has been my jam recently.
That one is a actual absurdity, but I understand the appeal.
So I feel like that kind of sets the stage for who we are. I mean, obviously, as a couple, we met on Tinder. I'm just going to put that out there.
We did.
We met on the greatest dating app of all time, which I guess some would say is now the worst one. But we met on it 5 years ago when I guess it was still decent. I don't know. I haven't been on Tinder since then, so I don't really know.
I have no frame of reference.
But that's how we met. And now here we are. I'm going to get married next year, doing a podcast.
We should talk about the proposal because that was book inspired. So to propose, I decided to get a book, a Harry Potter book specifically, from Etsy, where this lady, I'm forgetting her name now, but she essentially folds the pages in a way to where when you're looking at the book from the side, I guess, of the book, the opposite of the spine, like where you'd actually see the pages, it's folded in a way that says a word. And in this case, it said, "Marry me." And Rachel had come back from vacation, and I had it set up in the bedroom with the ring next to it. I think it was just the book and the ring, if I remember correctly. And I had it stacked up on your other books because it was like, it casted a shadow and it was kind of hard to read. So I wanted to make sure that you could read it okay. And then you came in and you almost picked it up and moved it and ruined it. And so I had to tell you to stop and then read it. And you did. And you got all happy. And I got down on like one knee and did the whole spiel, like, "Hey, will you marry me?" Mm-hmm. And you were like, "Yeah."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was funny because the random books sitting there, I was like, these don't belong here. And I was going to go put them back in their spot.
Like immediately walked in and you were like, "Wait, this isn't right." And pick it up and you start like trying to grab it or whatever. And I was like, wait, don't touch it.
It was very cute. I really liked it. And of course I said yes. Here we are. Now I want to know, what got you into reading? Like, I know you like reading, but I never really asked what kinds of books like made you a reader.
Originally, it was the fantasy style books. That's what's always appealed to me. I love the thrill of like new things and new concepts and magic and swords and knights and armor. But specifically, the Percy Jackson series was like the first one that sort of pulled me in and made me actually like read actively and seek out new books. It was the first one that I read that you would go into that like mandated sit silent and read in like the 5th grade or whatever, and they would actually make you read. And those are the ones that I got excited to read every time. At least that was probably the first series that pulled me in and made me actually want to read. What about you? What was your sort of first series?
Well, the Percy Jackson series is amazing, and I read that way, way, way back in the day. But the first series that I was really like, wow, I need to read all of this, was the series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. I don't really know how I was introduced to that series. I think it was a recommendation from a librarian when I was in elementary school, because technically I believe those books are considered middle grade novels, but I loved them. I ate them up. Like every time I read one, I had to immediately go to the library and get the next one. They were so good. I could read them in a day. Like even back then, I was a fast reader. I was always a fast reader. But my love of reading sort of stemmed from that. And then obviously I branched out into more young adult series. Harry Potter, for example, that's a really big one that I used to love. I know it's kind of taboo to talk about now, but we're not going to talk about J.K. Rowling on here. Harry Potter was a good one. I really liked that. It was just so whimsical and so magical, and it always made me wish that I could be a student at Hogwarts. And the funny thing is, I didn't even read the Harry Potter series until I was in 7th or 8th grade, I think. I don't know why. But again, I did the thing where I read the first few books in the series. I stopped on Prisoner of Azkaban, I remember, and then I didn't read it for a really long time. So then I went back and I picked it up and started from the beginning, blew through the first 2 books, got to Prisoner of Azkaban. I don't know why, but I stopped it again. Then I finally picked it up and read it all the way through when I was in 8th grade. And I was like, why could I not get through it sooner? Because it was so good. Those are definitely 2 series that really formed my love of reading. And then obviously I discovered the young adult romance books like your Sarah Dessens and your Jenny Hans and all of that. I was obsessed with all of that when I was in middle school and high school. And now I'm a romance reader too. I read all sorts of things as a kid, and I read all sorts of things now.
That's very comprehensive.
I am very passionate about reading. I'm
Can
very
tell.
passionate about books.
What you talk about though, about like getting, part of the way through a series and then sort of restarting. I mean, obviously that's a theme with Grey's Anatomy as well. So I see where
Yep.
that comes from.
Yeah.
But the Percy Jackson series, I remember doing a similar thing of like getting to, I think it was the fourth book. And then I think the fourth book was the Labyrinth. And so then I just didn't want to read it for whatever reason, put it down. And then I remember reading through the whole thing once they announced the next set of trilogies, I think is what they were. The Percy ones or the Olympus Heroes, Egyptian inspired one, and then there's another one I think I'm forgetting as well. But once those were announced, I wanted to read those. And I read one of the series.
What do you enjoy reading now? What do you as an adult read?
Right now, I really still like the like fantasy, and I'd even go as far as to say like high fantasy, like very magical, mystical. I want those very almost suspended belief elements to it. I think that makes for really interesting world building and storytelling. And I mean, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and stuff too, so I'm very used to those settings. Lately, though, I've been reading books that involve like detectives and westerns, like the Old Chrome box set. The three of those books that I'm reading is actually a combination of that. It's sort of like a detective in a western setting while also being a little bit like futuristic sci-fi-y, so it's got that element of fantasy in there as well. And then also very, very recently, as of like a couple of days ago, started reading comic books again, or graphic novels, I guess, to be more exact. And those have been really fun. It's been really awesome to get back into those because back in the day I'd read the Bone series, which if anybody knows what those are, is a really good series of graphic novels. And so since I've been reading the comic books again, I want to go back and read all that all over again as well. What about you? What are you reading right now? Or what do you enjoy reading now, I should say?
I've been on a historical fiction kick in the past few months, and I'm also kind of back in my romance era. I've been reading a lot of those like goofy rom-com kind of books. You know, they're fine. They're a hit or miss for me because sometimes they're just way too predictable and way too cheesy, way too cringeworthy. You would hate them. But
That's true.
I think they're fun sometimes. Like when I'm not sure what to read, sometimes I'll just pick up a random romance book and I'll read it. And it's fine. Like I've been sucked into a couple romance series this year and I'm still working my way through them. But aside from that, I also really enjoy thrillers. Thrillers have been one of my top genres for the past couple months now. And thriller was actually my top genre of all of 2023. I read a lot of thrillers. I love thrillers. I guess I love reading about people murdering other people, which makes sense. I love Criminal Minds too, the TV show. Anyway.
Trying not to get worried over here about the implications of that, but okay, sounds good. I also like Criminal Minds though.
Don't worry, I'm not going to kill you in your sleep.
Thanks.
And I also became acquainted with fantasy books over the past year, specifically Sarah J. Maas. I've read her A Court of Thorns and Roses series, I've read her Throne of Glass series, and I have her Crescent City series sitting on my shelf that I really need to read. But it's so intimidating because it's like 900 pages long, and that's a lot of pages to work through. And I know I've done it before, but it's just daunting. Especially because I keep hearing how Crescent City is all this world building and it's an urban fantasy and there's a lot of characters to keep track of. I'm just nervous that my brain can't handle it.
That you'll have to get out the notepad and keep track of all the characters and write them all down.
I will. I've already screenshotted a couple of Crescent City reader guides off of Facebook that I'm hoping will help me when I actually do start reading it, if I do get lost and not know how all these characters are related to each other.
Just the concept of a reader's guide for a book seems crazy to me, but I mean, I guess maybe it's really interesting. I've only heard good things about it, so.
I'm excited to read it, but I'm also very scared to read it. But that's pretty much what I like. I like historical fiction, romance, thrillers, fantasy. I read pretty much anything and everything. And that's why I am so excited for this podcast, because I feel like it will be a great way to recap really awesome books we've read. We plan on doing a couple of deep dives into books. We'll do some buddy reads. There'll be some episodes where we each pick a book for the other person to read. So sorry, Joe, but you're going to have to read a romance here and there. And it's going to be hilarious.
Oh, that should be very exciting. Maybe I'll branch
is.
out and make you read like a comic book or something.
Not thrilled about graphic novels or comic books, but it's like a picture book, right?
A picture book. You just angered millions of fans out there that love comic books. I think Stan Lee just rolled over in his grave hearing picture book.
They have pictures, don't they?
I guess by literal definition, they do have pictures. Yes, you got me there. I'll make sure to pick one that's like fun and has a good story to it.
If we're going to be picking out things for each other to read, it means we're also going to be reading genres that we don't typically read, which is, again, something that I think is awesome. I think it's always great to branch out and read things that you don't typically read, because you never know if you're going to like it until you try it.
True. Yeah, you might learn I might learn, I should say, that I might really enjoy romance books.
Which I would be shocked.
I would be shocked as well.
I think my eyes would literally fall out of my head if you told me you liked a romance book.
I think I could see myself liking a romance book, but I don't know about the whole romance genre. But I'll keep an open mind.
You're going to want to keep an open mind when you get to some of them, but
I'll try my best. And I mean, I'm excited to get a lot out of this in the sense of, sharing our journey over the course of the podcast, because I think we forgot to mention previously, but we're getting married in almost exactly 1 year from now, like 51 weeks. So it'll be fun to kind of see our progress throughout this up until that day, and then from thence there forward. That's English, I think, right?
Maybe.
Old English?
We're not good with words.
I try.
Yeah, we try. Well, we may read a lot, but the vocabulary doesn't always stick. But that's okay. That's what Google is for. Webster's Dictionary.
Exactly. That's what we pay them for. I don't know if I pay them.
I have no idea how Google makes its money, but that's okay. But anyways, getting married will not change my love of reading. I will still be reading all day, every day. I don't plan on stopping that.
I think that's like part of the reason, we like each other, right? Is the reading.
Yeah.
Adds to the appeal.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this. Each episode, we're also going to try to have a theme, as I mentioned, like deep dives, buddy reads. We each pick out a book for each other. Well, we're also going to do episodes that feature different book recommendations. So I guess you could say that this episode is also a book recommendation episode, because we are about to get into our topic this week, which is reading slumps. I know we've both been feeling a little slumpish, so I thought it was only fitting that we discuss what a reading slump is, why we get into slumps, how we can get pulled out of slumps, all that fun stuff.
That word almost doesn't sound real now that you've said it so many times. Slump, slumpy, slumper.
Slumpish.
Exactly.
Well, basically when you're in a slump, a reading slump to be more exact, you don't really feel like reading anything. And it's just weird for a reader's brain to not be reading anything.
Right. I think you want to read and you try, you see things that seem interesting, but then you just, it stops there. You can't get yourself to open it up or turn the page.
Yes. And it happens more often than it should. And sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint why you're in a reading slump. I mean, sometimes it could just be an overall life slump that makes you not want to read, but that's just depressing and I don't want to go into life slumps. But
not this time. This isn't the therapy episode.
I don't think that will ever be an episode.
You never know. Got to keep it on the table.
Reading slumps can be tricky to navigate. And sometimes they can last a day, sometimes they can last a week, sometimes they can last a month. I've known people who've had reading slumps for a month, and it makes me sad for them. Because can you imagine wanting to do your favorite hobby, but not being able to do it?
For a whole month seems it almost feels exhausting even though you're not doing anything. Somehow it sounds exhausting.
It is. Reading slumps, I can guarantee you, are the absolute worst thing in the world. So, what puts me in a slump? This really took some thinking because a lot of things can put me in a slump. But I've narrowed it down to a couple things that I find are the main triggers of my reading slumps. So, suffering through a bad book because I feel bad DNFing, which DNFing for my non-reader friends means did not finish. You did not finish the book. And reading a really good book can also put me into a reading slump because then nothing else lives up to it. And everything just seems lackluster compared to the amazingness that I just read.
So it sounds like you always need to read like 4 stars, 3-star books or something like that. You need the very middle of the road.
It's really funny that you say that because my average star rating, according to Storygraph, which Storygraph is an app to track your reading progress, like Goodreads, but better. According to Storygraph, my average star rating every single month and even last year was 4 stars. I give most books a 4-star rating.
I think that sounds right, though. When you think about like movie reviews, for example, if somebody gave, only 10 stars or 10 out of 10s or something, that seems like a red flag too. It's like not every movie can be perfect.
Well, maybe they just really like every single movie.
You know what? Maybe they do. Maybe they just love like every movie that's come out.
Well, sometimes I go on this streak where I have 3 or 4 5-star reads in a row, and I'm like, okay, something's got to be wrong. Like, there's got to be a flaw in some of these books, which maybe there are, but to me and my brain in the moment, everything is perfect because I do most of my rating based on vibes. I don't really critique too hard unless I'm really having beef with something in the book.
That's fair. I think that's how I like to think that's how most people approach it. They try not to be super overly analytical and they try to just enjoy what they've read and rate it based on that.
I also try to not be too critical of characters' actions in books because, well, first of all, they're not real people. They're just characters. The author wrote them and made them that way. But sometimes something happens in a story where a character does something and it will totally skew my star rating of the book because the character just does something so stupid that would never even happen in real life. And you kind of have to think, what was the author even thinking to make this character do that?
I think that's a fair criticism, though, because a lot of the times, especially I notice it in TV shows where it'll just be a lack of communication or something just so silly and ridiculous that it kind of ruins the whole thing.
Don't even get me started on miscommunication. That's like the worst thing a book can have. But anyway, back to slumps. Recently, a book that I read that really put me in a slump, and I didn't really want to read anything. I couldn't decide what to read. I was asking you, Joe, to pick out books for me, and then the book he picked out, I didn't even want to read. So there you have it. My slump was so bad, I couldn't even be coerced to read a book that he picked out for me. But this book that I read that put me into a slump was called Weekends with You by Alexandra Page. And now this book started off fine. It is a romance. The cover is all pink and pretty. It has the 2 people on the front, so it's going to be a rom-com, or so I thought. The romance aspect of it ended up being really, really minimal, almost not there, which I was not expecting based on the synopsis of the book. So basically, this girl works for a flower shop, and we get to know her career, her boss, the workings of the flower shop, sort of, and she needs a new place to live. So she asks one of her friends if she knows of a place, and her friend tells her that there's an opening in their warehouse flat. They've basically converted a warehouse into flats. They live in London, so they're called flats. So she moves in, and it kind of turns into this whole story of found family because she starts, becoming really close friends with them, starts hanging out with them. And of course, one of the guys who already lives in the flat takes an interest in her. She takes an interest in him. And I thought we were going to get more screen time per se with the couple, but we don't. And I guess that's because the male main characters occupation is a traveling photographer. So he's only at the flat once a month. I guess I should have taken that into consideration when reading this book, but I didn't. I was just like, it's stupid that we get no couple interactions when this is supposed to be a romance. It ended up just being the story of found family, and the female main character was kind of like annoying me at the end. So I gave it a whopping 2 stars, which some people might say is really critical of this book based on what I just said. But trust me, it deserved 2 stars. I almost gave it 3, but then I decided 3 was being a little too nice because it really bothered me that this was a romance book that barely had any romance in it.
Yeah, that seems very frustrating. Like the whole point of the genre is supposed to be the romance, but yet no romance. Like,
Yeah, so that put me into a slump, and I didn't feel like reading anything for a few days after that one. And that just made the whole experience with that book even worse. But, I'm not trying to be mean about it or knock on the author because I believe it was her debut novel and it was a really great effort. And I could tell that she put her heart and soul into it. So if it sounds like something you might like, please consider giving it a chance. Weekends with You by Alexandra Page just wasn't for me, but it could be something you will enjoy.
that was a good sell. I like that. Pulled it back.
I work in sales. It's what I do.
That's true. Marketing degree, in case you forgot from earlier, talking about the boring facts.
The other thing I mentioned was that reading a really good book can also put me into a reading slump. And that kind of happened after I read A Sweet Sting of Salt by Rose Sutherland. That one was so good, and I'm shocked that I loved it. It was actually one of my favorite reads of last month. So this book takes place in Nova Scotia in the 1800s. And you start off by getting to know Jean, who is a midwife, and she comes across Murren, who is crying in the woods, and she's out by the water, and it looks like she's going to jump in the water, and it kind of looks to Jean that Murren is in labor, so Jean has to coerce her to go back to her cottage and help her give birth to this baby, but Murren really doesn't want to. She just wants to go back out to the water, and it's this whole rigmarole. But finally, Jean gets Murren back to her cottage, and then that's when the story starts. And after we hit that point, I was like, okay, I'm invested. This is interesting. What is happening? And this book sort of turned into a sapphic sort of romance because, it's not directly said, but Jean, now spoiler alert, close your ears if you don't want to hear this, but Jean likes girls. And it's the 1800s, so you're not supposed to like girls if you're a woman, right? So it's a really bad thing for Jean to be attracted to Murren. But the thing is, Murren is also attracted to Jean. And it's there's this whole tension there this whole time. And it was so good. The whole story was so good. And then we learn that Murren has a really horrible husband. And Jean finds out, and then that's when we kind of see Jean's character arc take place, because Jean used to be this super soft-spoken woman. But when she finds out that Murren could be in trouble, she starts trying to figure out how to save her, talking with everyone, making all these big plans to get Murren and her baby to safety. And it's amazing. And at the end, the big reveal, now I don't want to spoil the big reveal, but this book basically took everything that I like in a book and combined it with a folklore retelling. It was so good. I know I did not do A Sweet Sting of Salt justice with that little explanation, but it was so interesting, so good. I wish I could read it again just to experience it again.
Like wipe your mind blank so you can read it again.
Yeah, because something tells me I would enjoy it the second time I read it.
Maybe you should just read it again.
I should just read it again. It was good. If anyone else reads it, you have to let me know because I need to talk about it with somebody.
Maybe that's the one you'll pick out for me.
Ooh, maybe. That's a good idea. Anyway, so that's basically a couple books that I've read recently that have put me into a slump, either good or bad. So, Joe, what puts you into a slump?
My biggest thing for a slump is when an ending is bad, and I'm using kind of like air quotes here. Bad is, it means two things. I either didn't like it in the traditional sense of just it wasn't very good, it wasn't very interesting, or it was kind of slow or lame or something like that. Or the other one, which I think is a lot more impactful, is it left me wanting so much more. Like it left unfinished stories or kind of like an open-ended question for a character. I like very closed stories that answer everything. The last trilogy I read, which was the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, first of all, is an amazing set of books. They were all very, very good. However, I'm going to try not to spoil anything because I do think they are worth the read. But the ending of the whole trilogy just kind of left a lot of questions unanswered. And you could tell that's what he was going for and that was his goal. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But for me personally, I remember wanting so much more from like the main characters in there because it's kind of like a group of characters. It's kind of like a cast. So there's like 5 of them that go throughout the whole or the whole trilogy. In the first book, it talks about Logan, who's essentially the quote unquote main character. And then it's his story of getting together with the group and all of these very high fantasy concepts. Like there's a wizard and they kind of get a prince and they get like a rogue and all that kind of stuff. So it's still very similar to those high fantasy, almost like Dungeons and Dragons again concepts. And so that was really interesting and it's really great. And the storytelling in this multiple perspective thing it does, where it has so many different interesting characters and you get to see so many different perspectives, is just, it's great. It's fantastic storytelling and it's fantastic writing. However, again, the finish or the ending left me so frustrated. I just wanted answers for all these people and I wanted, there were so many things that felt completely open-ended to the point to where it didn't make any sense. Now, all that being said, you, Rachel, actually bought me the pseudo sequel to that. There's another set of, I think it's going to be 3 books as well, written by Joe Abercrombie again. And it's I can't remember the name of the trilogy now, or the name of the next series, but it's essentially the next part of the First Law. I think it's called like the Madness something. The Age of Madness is the next. I believe it's a trilogy. Might have to check my facts on that, but that's pretty much what puts me into a slump is these, just any ending that leaves me wanting more.
That's fair because I've read plenty of books that don't give me a satisfactory ending. If I'm reading a thriller, for example, and it kind of just ends, I'm like, okay, but like, why did this happen? And then you kind of are just left guessing. I enjoy reading books that have a nice wrap up where it kind of explains in a way why what happened.
Exactly. I like that of like my answers. It's kind of actually what I talked about before. If I like detective books, which is that's what I like. I want the detective or the answers. I want all the, plot points to link up and imagine you're got the board with all the pins and the strings. I want them all to make sense and they all go back to the central theme or something like that of the book. But when you don't do that, it leaves a lot to be desired. So I'm hoping that with the next series of that, I'll read it and it will kind of help answer some of those questions or those issues, I guess, that I had from before.
Hopefully it's good. I bought you that first book, so it better be good.
Yeah, that's true. You did buy it for me.
So to get out of a slump, I tend to lean on other hobbies. So I have many hobbies. I like to paint, I like to crochet, I like to do cross stitch, I like playing Animal Crossing, I like staring at the cat who's actually staring at me right now. I like going for walks. I like being outside. I bought a hammock for our balcony, so I like hammocking, laying in the hammock, reading a book. Reading is obviously one of my hobbies, but not something I want to do when I'm feeling slumpish. I also do this thing that I like to call rotting. I will sit on the couch for like 8 hours and just watch TV or play on my phone and just basically not use my brain. It's not my favorite use of my time. We all know that I'm very restless and I don't like sitting around and doing nothing.
That's very true. It's like your least favorite thing to do.
Relaxing for some reason is just not something that comes naturally for me. I cannot relax. I always need to be doing something. If I'm not doing anything, I usually do some dishes, vacuum the house, make the bed, do some laundry that doesn't need to be done.
That's true. You do vacuum a lot when you don't have anything to do.
It passes time for me. I don't know what else to say, but at least I'm keeping the house clean.
True. I guess I can't complain.
The cat hates the vacuum, though. She absolutely hates it, so I always feel bad whenever I drag it out just because I have nothing else to do. I'm also a really big mood reader, so if I'm coming out of a slump, it might take me 1 or 2 or 10 books in order to find one that I'm interested in reading, which is, again, not ideal because I feel like I'm just wasting my time reading like the first 20 pages of like 10 books.
Right. And then you get like sick of it and you put it down and then you keep going.
It's just not fun and it makes the slump worse. But I have found recently that reading books that I liked when I was a teenager has been getting me out of slumps recently. Or I've found that just simply not reading and just doing my day-to-day has also helped. So we'll see if I uncover any other ways to get out of a slump over the course of this podcast. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I will keep you posted.
I think it's funny that you bring that up because, doing anything else besides reading, as where I feel like the only thing that's really pulled me out of a slump lately is to just force myself to read, like picking up or scavenging for something that sounds remotely interesting and then forcing myself to read like 50 to 100 pages or something just to do something. That's kind of what I did with this series that I'm reading now, the old Chrome. It's the box set, so there's 3 books, but when we were traveling at the airport, I had nothing to do and I was just sitting there for a while, so I decided to pull out my phone and finally start the books and read them. And then next thing you know, now I can't put them down. I spent probably more time than I should admit just reading both today and yesterday and the day before.
You can never spend too much time reading. I spend a lot of my days reading, and it makes me sad that it's been less and less lately, but I've been trying to not watch as much Grey's Anatomy at night, and I've been trying to read instead, but Grey's is calling my name tonight, so we'll see what happens.
You have been on that Grey's Anatomy binge like very heavily, and I've been watching it with you.
I have, and I've just gotten to season 6. Well, I guess I should say we have just gotten to season 6. And things are about to get interesting with Grey's Anatomy. So will I read tonight?
We'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see.
But slumps are hard. I hate being in reading slumps. And I know what really helps me when I'm in a slump as well is when people tell me what books have gotten them personally out of slumps. So I thought it would be fun to tell you about some books that I have found that have personally gotten me out of slumps, books that have gotten me excited about reading again. I hope that there is something in this list that can help someone out there who is struggling with a reading slump. This is starting to sound like one of those like ads for like a medication or something, but reading can be that too.
Should we explain like the side effects? You might have paper cuts, you might have dry eyes from not blinking.
I mean, if you're not blinking when you read, that's not my problem, but
yeah, it seems like a separate issue.
So I find that there are a few select genres and or types of books that help me get out of a slump. Thrillers are really great for getting you out of a slump. Trending books. I feel like I always have FOMO when I see super trending books on Bookstagram or just anywhere else, but I'm not reading them. So I feel like when I finally do read one of them, it kind of makes me excited about reading again and can pull me out of that slump. Romances I have found are really good. Nice, lighthearted romances. None of the super heavy topic romances. And then I found that rereading old favorites, which I like to call nostalgic books. So there are select authors that I would love to read to get out of a slump again. So these are just recommendations. I'm not telling you to read them, but if you do read them, it will make my heart so happy.
So you better read them.
So you better read them. So thrillers. One that I really loved recently, and that was my favorite book of the month of February was The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. And this one was wild. I really don't want to spoil anything about it, but basically it follows this one girl who goes back to a summer camp that she used to attend back when she was a teenager. So many secrets are uncovered, and literally it goes into this whole like mystery of the summer camp, and it's super intriguing, and I loved it so much. I think I gave it 5 stars. If I could have, I would have given it infinite stars, because that ending, literally I sat there like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. It was amazing. It was so good. The Clinic by Cate Quinn was also really good. This one was more of a like spooky horror-esque type thriller. This book I was actually super skeptical about because I had seen mixed reviews on it, but it actually ended up being so good. I did give this one 4.5 stars. It did not get a full 5 from me because some of the stuff was a little bit out there in my opinion, but the writing was super good. The story was fascinating. Every single reveal like was making my heart race. And I call them reveals, not twists, because they weren't really shocking. I don't know how else to put it.
They didn't blow you away?
Yeah, they didn't blow me away. The thing about The Clinic that I absolutely loved was that it followed 2 different characters that were conducting 2 different investigations, quote unquote, surrounding the clinic at the same time. Now, the clinic is the name of this rehabilitation facility that's super exclusive. I believe it took place in the Pacific Northwest. It follows Meg, who's doing her investigation into her sister who mysteriously died while in this rehab clinic. And then it has Kara's investigation into the internal operations of this place because Kara works at the clinic. And both storylines were actually super intriguing, although I did enjoy Meg's storyline more than Kara's, but that usually happens when I read dual point of view books. There are 2 storylines that you think wouldn't really tie together, but they did. And that's the mind-blowing part of this book to me. That these 2 unlikely stories came together. So this one I think is a good one to pull you out of a slump. And then I also think that the book Keep Your Friends Close by Leah Conan is a really good one to get out of a slump. That one features con artists, and that's all I'm going to say, and it was super intriguing. So highly recommend those 3 thrillers to get you out of a slump. Loved all of them, honestly.
I don't really have any thrillers that I could recommend because I don't really read thrillers, but I could recommend some fantasy books.
Are they fantasy books that have specifically gotten you out of a slump?
Yes.
Ooh, then do tell, do tell.
The first one I would say recently pulled me back out of the slump was Curses and Cocktails by S.L. Rowland. It's a Tales of Andrea book. Andrea? I'm not really sure what it is, but it's supposed to be within like another world, I guess. But it's a standalone of, I guess, an adjacent series or a spin-off series or something along those lines. And this book was just such a fun, easy read, and ironically it's actually kind of romancy. It's very fantasy-esque, or it's very fantasy inspired because it's got characters like elves and gnomes and runes and magic and stuff like that. But the cocktails part of the Curses and Cocktails is essentially about this retired military person who decides to move to the big city that he's not used to. He moves down south from being up north in the wintry cold his whole life while he served in the military. And he decides to buy what they believe to be a cursed, or what the town believes to be, I should say, a cursed storefront. He buys the storefront and he he sort of poaches the local barkeep from the tavern, and them together make drinks and food and things like that, and they sort of just open up a tavern. And it's very fun and easy, and the drinks in there have like, real life inspired terms. Like they talk about whiskey, but it's spelled differently, or they spell like gin, I think it's GYN or something like that. So you can essentially make all of the cocktails that are in the book too if you wanted to, but a lot of them are inspired by real life. The whole book itself was just very easy and it was very fun. And you can almost see yourself there with such vivid storytelling, while also being able to be like lighthearted and you weren't stressed about it or anything. And it was just a lot of fun. And it had a nice ending and it was very wrapped up. And it made me want to find where I can get the rest of the stories of this world, I guess you'd call it, because the concepts that were introduced into it were very interesting. And it made you want to learn more about the world and the magic that they talk about and the runes and all that kind of stuff. It was very fun.
Well, fun books are always good for getting you out of slumps. Just, I love the types of books where I'm reading them and I'm like, I'm genuinely having fun.
Right. And that's what this was, at least for me. I have one more that pulled me out of a slump. Was I don't know what genre this would be. It's called The Book Thief. This is an older book, and I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's by Markus Zusak. Essentially, the premise of the story is that it follows the point of view of death. And death is essentially an actual entity or a character in the book. And it takes place during World War II from the German side, essentially. You follow this. You follow Death, who is following a young girl who is a young German. And it kind of goes through their story and their family and everything that's happening from their point of view. And it's very, very well written. And it was very interesting. And the whole book thief portion of it is that the girl steals books throughout the whole story because she really wants to read and she really loves to read. If there's a book that'll pull you out of a reading slump, is reading about how much somebody loves to read. Like it kind of reminded you why you like to do what you're doing. And there was people during certain time frames of the world that couldn't do that or they weren't allowed to. And there's all this kind of stuff. So it was very like kind of sobering, I guess. It was very like eye-opening to that time because I guess it's historical fiction, I guess is what it's probably actually written down as. But it was very interesting. And this is if you haven't read it, it is an extremely good book. And don't be intimidated by the fact that it has like World War II. It's not very World War II-y. It's very focused on the narrative and focused on the girl's life and the story of their family and them harboring fugitives and their story of famine and feast and all that kind of stuff. It's very, very interesting. So that one definitely pulled me out of it.
That is a book that I still have not read. That's definitely one that's been on my TBR, my to be read list for a very, very long time now. So I need to just stop dilly-dallying and pick it up already. To sort of wrap up books that can get you out of a slump, we have some lighthearted romances that I have read that I personally love. The Edens series by Devney Perry. That is such a fast-paced series. All of the books in that series sort of have a different romance trope. It keeps it fresh. They're not all the same thing. It doesn't get stale because I've read romance series before where I feel like it's kind of repetitive, kind of the same, but The Edens is really good. It's on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, you can read the Edens series with that. I also thought Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane was a really, really good book. It's your sapphic romance, and it's basically a romantic comedy about death. That's how I would describe it, and I'm pretty sure that's how the author describes it. It's a very weird juxtaposition, but it was done so well. It was so funny, like actually hilarious, but it was also so sad. So it kind of gives you like a mix of everything, but it was definitely that laugh out loud sort of book. So Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrane is definitely one of those more lighthearted romances, but it also does have some tough topics in it. So you kind of have to be in a good headspace for it. Overall, I would say the Eden series and Here We Go Again are good romances to get you out of a slump. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier, reading more nostalgic books can also bring you out of a slump. I have found myself rereading Sarah Dessen recently. She is a young adult romance author, and her books are always just so lighthearted and happy and make you feel good. And they do touch on heavier topics a little bit, but it has to involve teens, so it's not too heavy. Like the book I just read, What Happened to Goodbye, that did have the theme of a divorced family in it, and it was kind of a messy divorce. So if you are a child of divorce, it might be traumatizing to read. But again, everyone has their own triggers. So just beware going into books as always. Sarah Dessen's books, favorite of mine when I was in high school. What Happened to Goodbye definitely pulled me out of a slump recently. And then I do want to reread, which the next time I go into a reading slump, I'm going to check out the first book in this series again, but the Mediator series by Meg Cabot. Oh, that series was so good. I read it when I was in 8th grade. It was a recommendation from my 8th grade English teacher, and it was amazing. This series, it's kind of weird because it has to do with this girl who's kind of like in love with a ghost, but it works, and it's not like wildly inappropriate because it is young adult. It's good. It just, trust me that it is good. I know you're looking at me like it sounds really, really weird.
I am. I'm giving you a little bit of the stink eye from the side.
You are. And I have no shame. I really, really liked that series. So that's going to be my next go-to when I'm in a slump.
All right. I'll try to remind you if it happens again. I think for nostalgic books, I've talked before about getting back into like graphic novels and comic books. And while I didn't read the Ultimate Spider-Man series back when I was younger, the whole concept of getting back into comic books has been what's pulled me out really heavily. Like I pretty much read the entirety of the first volume of the Ultimate Spider-Man in like a day. I mean, I know they're kind of short, but at the same time, I was so excited to read it because I used to read them quite a bit. I should say graphic novels and comic books quite a bit when I was like in middle school and maybe even a little bit younger. My grandma actually used to get the Spider-Man comics in the newspaper, and then I would go over there and I would just have a whole stack of the issues and I'd read a whole bunch of them. So that was always really fun.
Wait, comics in the newspaper?
Well, like she would get not like comics like Garfield or something, like comics as in you would get like you'd subscribe to like a thing. I don't know how they did it back then, but essentially you would subscribe to a thing, and with your newspaper you would get also like an issue of a comic book, like a Marvel or a Spider-Man or a Batman or a Superman or something like that.
That's so wild. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, you used to be able to sign up for all that kind of stuff. She'd get like the People magazines, the comic books, all that kind of stuff. They also used to do them in actual issues, so it was only like 20 pages or something like that. So that's why there's so many comic books, is because they're all in issues and they're really, really thin and small.
Well, I remember whenever the Sunday paper used to come, I used to love reading the little comic strips that were in the Sunday paper. There was this one that I really liked, For Better or For Worse. I don't know if you know what that comic was.
I don't think so.
It was so good. They were all so good. I don't know if anyone knows what I'm even talking about, but I remember in the Sunday paper, there would be all these comics, and some of them were pretty clever and funny. Maybe that's where I got my sense of humor from, because I would read them when I was a small child.
There you go. That's where you got the dry humor from. But I mean, we used to read those a lot too. Like our library back in school used to have Garfield books and Calvin and Hobbes books. And so we used to check those out and read them as well. And it would just be a whole collection of them. I actually like comics so much I have a tattoo on my shoulder of Calvin and Hobbes.
That you do. So nostalgic books, nostalgic comics, all great for getting us out of a slump. I feel like it's been a thing recently on Bookstagram where a lot of people have been rereading childhood favorites. And I don't know if everyone's just sort of like feeling nostalgic recently, if there's something in the air, or if there's just not any releases that are enticing them in the book world recently. I don't really know.
Yeah, I guess I don't really know too much either. If there's just a dry spell or something in terms of new releases.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I will say the last couple months with my book subscriptions, I do subscribe to Book of the Month and Aardvark. I haven't really been too enticed by their choices. I actually paused my Book of the Month because of that, because I haven't been super excited about anything that they've been releasing. So I feel like for me personally, there haven't been any new releases that I've been super excited about. There's been one or two here and there, like Abby Jimenez and Emily Henry have new books out. and Catherine Center is going to have a book that's coming out in June. And I know some other authors have other books coming out later in the year, but I feel like right now it's just been, for me, it's just been stale. Like nothing has been capturing my attention on new releases.
I think that's fair. I mean, I'm not on Instagram as mentioned earlier, so I'm not as like close to the new releases and things like that. I don't do book of the month, though maybe I should. Who knows? So my, I guess, like new releases are people's probably very old releases. I'm like, oh, I didn't know this existed, and I'll just find it and like it or something like that.
It's like discovering new old music.
Exactly, yeah.
So it was really great to get some insight as to what causes some slumps for you. I feel like I learned more about you just from this episode. Like we said, the next step in a relationship is starting a podcast. So here we are.
How sweet.
Starting a podcast. And it was fun. I liked learning about what you are reading, even though I already kind of knew because you're the only person I really talk to 24/7.
Right. And now we're doing it even more. But I get what you're saying. Yes. It's very interesting when you get the opportunity to kind of put your thoughts to paper, so to speak, and actually talk about the things you're reading or the things you're doing or what you like, etc.
Yeah. And how was your first podcast episode ever?
It's exciting. I mean, I had fun. I'm having fun. I guess we're not quite done with it yet, but I think this has been fun, and I like doing this, and I'm looking forward very much to doing it again.
Me too. So I'm hoping this week we don't fall into a slump. That would not be good. No slumps for either of us. No slumps allowed. But this week I am reading The Room on Rue Amélie, I think is how you say it. It's French. It's by Kristen Harmel, and it's a historical fiction that takes place in Paris, France during World War II. I read a lot of World War II historical fiction that takes place in Paris, France. So I feel like by now I should be an expert on what happened during the war in Paris. And then I'm supposed to be getting in the mail very, very soon a book that I ordered from bookshop.org for Independent Bookstore Day. I ordered Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, which is her recent release. Very excited for that to come in, and I will be reading it the second it comes in. And you're looking at me like I don't need any more books on my shelf. But here we are. I ordered a book because they were doing free shipping. What can I say?
I'll just have to buy you another bookshelf.
Another bookshelf.
I've already gotten you 2 this year, 3 this year, it feels like.
But what are you reading this week?
This week, I am reading I kind of teased it before, of the Old Chrome box set, but more specifically, I'm on the second book of that, which is called The Atomic Ballerina, and it's by I.O. Adler.
The Atomic Ballerina is a very unsettling title for a book.
It is very interesting, and I'm not quite certain how it plays into the book yet. The first of this series, the Serif Express, was very interesting, and it immediately pulled me in, and it was just super interesting. I don't know what else to say about it. I couldn't put it down. They're very short. They're only like, I want to say the first book was under 200. The second book, I believe, is also under 200 pages. Might be slightly longer, like closer to 300. So it moves very quickly, and it's very fast paced, and it's very action packed, and it's all interesting. And so far, the second book has been nearly a direct continuation of the first book, but it's already rolled into like another story while still having the things from the first book. So it's like almost like watching like a season 2 sort of a show where you still have all of the different characters from the first season, but now you're on to this new sort of concepts and new, I guess, problem, conflict, and resolution and things like that. But it's been very interesting so far, and I'm extremely excited to continue reading that and move on to the third one, which is A Haunt of Jackals.
The titles just keep getting worse.
The Serif Express made a lot of sense because it took place, that was the name of the train that it took place on. Now, the Atomic Ballerina, I don't know how that factors in quite yet.
Is she like a robot?
That actually might make total sense because there's a lot of like robot sci-fi automation things going on. So now that you've said that, it kind of makes me think that maybe there's something there. That's kind of funny.
I'm a genius. What can I say?
You've like predicted the book without even literally seeing anything about it.
Haven't even read it. This was a fantastic episode. We hope that you enjoyed getting to know us. We are going to enjoy getting to know you throughout this podcast. And I hope that you also take some of these book recommendations into consideration when you are in a reading slump next, or even if you're not in a slump and they just sound really good to you. By all means, go for it. Read them. Add them to your TBR. I really hope you enjoyed listening to us, and we will be back next week with another great episode. And with that, happy reading.